heard the news about LaNorris Sellers coming back for his junior year, I was immediately excited for the Gamecock community. And, just when I started this channel, a lot of those supporters have been very fortunate to me on this channel. So big shout out to you guys. And what a victory for Shane Beamer and this football program. I mean, because I remember talking with my good friend JD Wyatt, shout out to him, Southern Fried Gentleman. One of the things we kind of talked about was what would happen to LaNorris Sellers this around this time, right? And in many ways, he was coming off such a strong year the year before, and Mike Shula came in as offensive coordinator. And when Lagans took the head coaching job at Appalachian State, we kind of just thought that his progression would naturally just get better. But in a lot of ways, he kind of regressed this year. And it's not all on him, by the way. There's a lot of different factors. I would say first and foremost, the offensive line was completely abysmal this year. 43 sacks. 43 sacks for LaNorris Sellers, which is just unsustainable for any quarterback whatsoever. But you can't all put it on the offensive line, right? Because I think there are some moments where I think LaNorris Sellers' football IQ could be questioned. For example, I think a lot of the times where when he should be staying in the pocket and trying to get through his progressions and getting through his reads, I think sometimes he panics and inadvertently scrambles for behind the line of scrimmage even more, and that just puts your team in a worse spot. But at the same time, there's just so many things about LaNorris Sellers that you have to love. He is very raw. He's still kind of finding his footing, no pun intended. And he's a guy that with the right coaching is a guy that you should be able to build your whole team around. And that's exactly what South Carolina is doing. And I think where the disconnect is between Sellers from last season compared to Sellers from this season is I think what Mike Shula was trying to do is, quite frankly, I think his offense was too convoluted for Sellers' skill set. I think he was trying to do more of kind of a typical NFL West Coast pro style type of offense where you need to have a guy who can be able to make those reads, make those progressions, and be able to see all over the field. When in reality, what Lagans was doing and what Shula should have been doing was giving Sellers quick, hot reads, be able to only give them an option or two, and just quick passing, and just be able to keep the ball rolling, right? And obviously, there's a reason why they were 104th ranked scoring offense in the country this year. A big part of that is you didn't have another ticket in Rocket Sanders, so I think their rushing attack definitely took a step back this year, which I think is part of what this conversation is about in terms of why the Gamecocks for 4-8 this season and 1-7 in conference play. I think there's another component to that conversation. And I'll be the first to admit on this channel, I was really high on Mike Shula when I found out that he got hired for the permanent gig because it made so much sense, right? He was the quarterback's coach from last season. I think in many ways, he probably wanted to redeem himself from the turbulent moment that he had as Alabama's head coach 20-something years ago. That's still a trip down memory lane for those of you who are a little bit older. Definitely a fascinating time to be a college football fan there. But nevertheless, I mean, because you have to think about this, right? I mean, in terms of his 3 years as a college football quarterback this year, 13 touchdowns for 8 interceptions, roughly 60% completion percentage, whereas last year he had 65.6% completion percentage, just over 2,500 yards, 18 touchdowns to 7 interceptions. So he's never necessarily been that guy to necessarily take over a game, but he is a guy that no matter what, you have to respect him as a runner. And what he's also best at is just simply being an improviser, right? Being able to have a system around him where it's quick reads and you can pick a side, which one you ever want, get those quick reads, figure out where the defender is going, and whichever side he's going to, throw it on the other side. And if that read isn't there, if he doesn't like it or whatever it is, let him scramble a little bit. Trust that option gameplay, and really let your quarterback do his thing. Because first and foremost, he is just so fun and exciting and electric to watch. But at the same time, when you saw him versus some of these SEC defenses this year, it just kind of makes it seem like that he's a guy who's only had 12 starts. Now, granted, 23, 24 starts is not a crazy amount, but in this day and age of college football, going into your junior year, 25 starts is a pretty good amount of time. But at the same time, it's obvious that he needs a little bit more work in order to get to his complete potential. So there is kind of that balancing act between the right coaching staff will definitely want to take a shot on LaNorris Sellers. And even right now, according to Mel Kiper, he's, I believe, the number third ranked prospect right now. And if he were to declare for the NFL draft. So there is an element of that too. But I also wholeheartedly believe that regardless of whether his take on the draft, I think it's definitely best for him to be able to have another year in the college football ranks, especially when Shane Beamer has done a phenomenal job, by the way, at building out his offensive staff. I love the move with Kendal Briles of TCU. You know, he's been able to really develop Josh Hoover into one of the best quarterbacks in the entire Big 12, someone who can air it out all over the field, someone who's super dynamic, and most importantly, someone who's a legitimate game changer. And also shout out to Stan Drayton as well. He was Penn State's running backs coach last year, also former Temple head coach. I used to live in Philadelphia, so I'm very familiar with Stan Drayton and well respected in terms of a football mind and somebody who I think can recruit at a pretty solid level. So I think when you have those two elements of it right, he's going to be able to have a better chance at being able to clean up some of these bad habits that he has, being able to have a little bit more consistency in terms of his mechanics. But everything is there for him to legitimately be successful. Now, in terms of what the overall Gamecocks need in terms of the actual team itself, first and foremost, you need to go as hard as you freaking can in the transfer portal in terms of bringing a running back in. He needs legitimate number two that can put a lot less pressure on him to kind of be that guy to throw all over the field. He's never going to be that guy. In some ways, he always kind of got compared to Cam Newton, and I think part of that was because of Mike Shula's connection to Cam Newton. But I would argue that LaNorris Sellers and Cam Newton are only similar in terms of their build. LaNorris Sellers is 6'3", 240 something pounds, and Cam Newton relatively similar build. But when Gus Malzahn recruited Cam Newton to Auburn, he was a 5-star kid. LaNorris Sellers was only a 3-star kid when Shane Beamer brought him to South Carolina. So there's a big difference in terms of Cam Newton's skill set walking into the SEC versus where LaNorris Sellers is at. And a lot of this is inflated in some way because of his season from last year, and rightfully so. I'll be the first one to tell you that I was completely on the bandwagon in terms of South Carolina this season too. And granted, a lot of their team was super senior heavy last year. So I think, objectively speaking, we knew that there would be at least a little bit of regression in terms of this Gamecock program, right? Now, were we all sitting there saying that they were going to go 4-8? No. But I think a reasonable expectation would be, hey, you know what? You walk away with 7 or 8 wins. You bring in the nucleus of what is to be your next roster for the next season or two, and you try to keep as many kids from not transferring as possible. I think that's really kind of what you're asking for if you're this South Carolina team, because you're kind of finding that balance, right? Because South Carolina, I wouldn't say is necessarily the laughing stock of the SEC, because I definitely think they have a good amount of resources there. I think they have a great alumni base there. I think Shane Beamer can coach his ass off in the right situation. But I think now, after this tough year which I'm really glad, by the way, that they didn't get rid of him because I think that would have been a really silly fire. But they said, you know what, the Shula experiment didn't work out. This offense was just a little bit more convoluted for what we kind of thought. But now you bring in Kendal Briles, who I hope will simplify the offense for LaNorris Sellers and the rest of this offense, find ways to put up points on the board while utilizing his strengths and getting into a balance where's the guy that threw for over 2,500 yards, 18 touchdowns, and beat schools like Texas A&M, like Missouri, like Clemson. And I guess what I'm curious about with Kendal Briles coming over from TCU is how similar is Kendal Briles' offensive scheme going to be from Lagans, right? Because LaNorris Sellers even said in an interview a couple days ago that he saw a lot of parallels between what Kendal Briles was doing when he was the offensive coordinator at Arkansas compared to what he's doing now. So I think even LaNorris Sellers can sit there and objectively say, hey, I know that I have a lot to work on, and I know I have the humility to do that. But what Shula was trying to do just simply wasn't working for what I'm trying to do. And I think he's also going to play a big part in terms of which guys, at least offensively speaking, are going to be kind of the vocal point in terms of where they go in the terms of the transfer portal, because they have the fun, they have the excitement, you have the energy, you have a lot of the foundation to be a really good, consistent program in the SEC. But I think the big conversation is going to be, hey, defensively speaking, were there some struggles this year? Absolutely. But are there some guys in the secondary and a couple linebackers that you can build around? Absolutely. But right now, the conversation is going to be around LaNorris Sellers, bringing in a legit 4 or 5-star kid running back who can jump in immediately, or somebody in the transfer portal, someone from a bigger school is not necessarily getting utilized as much. And how can you clean up this offensive line as quickly as possible to give this team a legitimate shot at creating that magic again?